less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves.
But it was a system of white supremacy.
This is one of the original architects of the South Carolina State House. His name was John Nearnessy. There's no evidence to show that this man ever enslaved anyone or ever owned slaves. But he was dependent on enslaved labor to build the State House because it was a slave society. So saying that 1% to 2% of people owned slaves really doesn't mean much when that 1% to 2% of the people controlled the livelihoods of the majority of people around them. And the people whose livelihoods that were being controlled had every reason to uphold the institution of slavery regardless of how wrong it was. Another thing that I want to talk about is this 1% to 2% idea. This is a population density map from 1790 to 1820. You'll see that the majority of people in America were living up here in this corner, the Northeast. Places like New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Connecticut, Boston. You'll even look further down and you'll see people were living in places like Baltimore as well. Most of those places had one thing in common. The majority of them were free states. So if you're saying something like 1% to 2% of the population owned slaves, you have to remember that the majority of the population in America at the time was living somewhere where there wasn't much slavery at all. Also, one of the main purposes of slavery, of enslavement, was cultivating land. There was a ton of land in the South, and there was more industry in the North. Places like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, while they did have some instances of enslavement, it wasn't necessarily a need because of the industry that they had up there. And of course, there were a ton of environmental factors that went into that as well. The South has a warmer climate, better to cultivate things like cotton, indigo, etc., etc., etc. But when you break it down and you show the amount of people in the South that owned enslaved people, you get a different story. In South Carolina, you'll see in the 1860s, 45% of families owned slaves, at least one. In places like Mississippi, it was almost 50%. In North Carolina, it was almost 30%. In Virginia, it was 25%. In Maryland, it was 12%. By the time we get to Delaware, we see that it's 3%. When you hear people like Jillian Michaels spew nonsense and ignorance, you really have to pick it apart. Because if you say only 1% to 2% of Americans enslaved people, it makes it sound like the Civil War was fought over nothing. But if you look at the areas where enslaved people were enslaved, you will see that it was a lot more than 1% to 2% of the population. If you're still here, I hope this helped. Like and follow for more.